Thank you all so much for coming today. Despite the rain, it's really wonderful to see all of your lovely faces. So thank you for being here. Please, if you want to be updated about their class, text code to that number, and those will give you some updates about our cooking classes specifically. But my name is Marisa Bolivar. I am a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and I am very excited to be here highlighting Beets today on behalf of Templeton Hills Community Farm, which, for those of you who have not seen it yet, is right there. You need some really good boots for the mud if you feel like navigating it, but it's not as muddy as you think it would be, right, Matt? I don't know your opinion about my feet.
outside.
Well, Matt runs the show up there, and he and Sabrina, his wife, are sponsored by our church here, Templeton Hills Sunday Adventist Church. We see this as a health ministry because we're really excited to teach the community about plant-based nutrition and the wonderful superpowers of vegetables to make you well and to optimize your health and prevent illness. It's a really wholesome, beautiful community project. We are sustained by a wonderful team of volunteers and certainly donations that keep us afloat, and it is good for the whole family. So I think if anybody has ever had tomatoes grown in their backyard, you can attest to the fact that they taste so good straight from the vine. It's not the same as buying them from the store, and that is true for all the produce up there. And Matt actually has very graciously brought down some of our beautiful produce for you to take home with you today. The beets are looking really good, and so are the greens, and the cilantro and the carrots are my personal favorite. They're so sweet and crispy, so please enjoy. And David. We're going to do this again. These are my quotes of the day, quotes of the month. Those who think they have no time for healthy eating will sooner or later have to find time for their illness. Edward Stanley once said this. He was actually a prime minister of England in the 1800s. So that was a long time ago, and we still knew that. But clearly nutrition comprises us and our health, and we have identified it as a primary tool in not only preventing illness, but optimizing our wellness. And while it certainly takes a lot of time to invest in your cooking, in your meals, the payoff is wonderful, right? I think we can all attest to that. The payoff is so meaningful to you and anyone who sits around your table. So I think it is a worthwhile investment. And then, much to contrast that, Ernestine Ulmer, who's an American author, said, "Life is uncertain, eat dessert first." And I love that because it captures what a dichotomy food is. It is critical for our survival and, of course, our wellness, and yet it is so complicated and layered, and to be an informed consumer has become so demanding. And contrary, again, to my first quote, the prospect of enjoying dessert first, I think, touches on something totally human about food. It's emotional. It's what brings us together. It is our bridge to celebrate and connect and socialize. And so I think that even if your nutrition is totally imperfect, that is still really important. And I encourage you to be adventurous and experimental and take risk in the cooking or in your kitchen. I actually had a patient ask me a few years ago, what was better, to go to McDonald's and sit all around the table together and enjoy a meal that maybe is junky, nutrition by someone's standards, or is it better to have a super nutritious, healthy meal, but everyone eats separately? And hands down, no hesitation, I would say it's better to go to McDonald's or wherever you think substandard and sit together and enjoy that meal together, because I think that takes precedent is the human experience in coming together with our food. So Obviously, you know, what we do from the day-to-day matters, and good nutrition is really important for us, and it's important for our health, but it's also important that's an enriching experience for everyone around your table. Next slide. So here is our outline. You can see they're having fun with beets. We got a lot of beets this month. This is an outline of what we'll be covering today. First, I'd like to briefly go over some of the highlights of our last class on radishes and protein before we dive into our focus on beets today. Next, we'll start with our first recipe of the day, a chocolate beet pudding, because dessert first. And since we covered fats and proteins in our 2 previous classes, I thought it would only be fair to unpack the third macronutrient of the human diet, which is carbohydrates, and where they're found, and what is maybe meaningful to know about them, and of course how they impact our health. Then we'll return to our recipes with a braised honey and balsamic roasted beets and greens, and then we'll finish the day with a beautiful beet borscht. Focus on beets made for a really easy month for me, other than all the peeling and the chopping. But beets are so naturally sweet, and they're versatile. You can throw them in a salad. You can have them by themselves. They can certainly be eaten raw or cooked, and as long as you can get past the washing and the peeling, it's such a wonderful way to add color and flavor and natural sweetness to your food. So it's a fun month for us. So radishes. So if you were here last month, you may recall that we have a lot of radish varieties up at the farm, and they come in all kinds of colors, lent by those beautiful polyphenols, and certainly a wide variety of spiciness. That spiciness is favored in warmer growing temperatures, so radishes in the warmer months will certainly have more of that characteristic. But they're packed with fiber and vitamin C, and as I mentioned, the color is lent by those beautiful polyphenols, which have a lot of antioxidants. Antioxidants protect your cells from the damage of free radicals and other toxins, and you get toxins all over the place. Most of us don't think about it much, but they're in our environment. They are in our food sometimes, especially depending on how we cook our food, and those polyphenols help protect us from the damage that they would otherwise cause. Those isothiocyanates, though, are the star player because they are responsible for that super spicy flavor that radishes give us. So isothiocyanates are also found in wasabi and horseradish, and even the bitter characteristic of cruciferous vegetables, which is one of the things that makes foods like broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts so nutritious, because isothiocyanates are a really remarkable nutrient. And they are formed actually by the plant as a way to try to protect itself. Because obviously a predator wouldn't want to eat something so spicy and bitter, right? But unfortunately for the plant, it's really protective for us as well. And they have some pretty remarkable properties. They have some antimicrobial properties. They have ability to make our cells more insulin sensitive, which is what we're going to talk about today. And they also have some phenomenal anti-tumor properties. Not only do they deactivate carcinogens, but they help your body excrete the carcinogens, and then they kill the cancer cells. So that's like a 3 birds with 1 stone impact that makes these really special. And the pharmaceutical industry has been trying very hard to encapsulate these isothiocyanates, so it'll be interesting if they can find a way to do that someday in a way that keeps them stable so that we can use it as a chemotherapeutic agent. The other thing that we spoke about at length was protein. We compared animal and plant-based proteins in population studies ranging from 100,000 people to 400,000 people. These are really reliable studies. And not only did we determine that plant-based eaters get way more than enough protein, on average 70% more than the requirement, without even trying, without even thinking about it. but also that reducing the animal protein in your diet by even just 3% has a remarkable outcome, decreasing premature death by 10% increments. So for every 3% animal protein you swap out with plant-based protein, you have 10% decreased risk of dying prematurely from disease. So those small changes can have big, lasting impacts. And then lastly, we discussed meat analogs and the environmental and health reasons that are making them powerful competitors in the food marketplace. And we concluded that these meatless meat products are likely favorable to real meat, go figure, and they are novel foods. So until we have a lot more information, we should be skeptic. We should consume them in moderation. And at the end of the day, beans and lentils are still probably your best bet. Any questions about the material that we covered last month for those of you who were here? All right. Beets. So I said lots of varieties to try. I meant 2, actually, but they're 2 very wonderful varieties to try. We have candy stripe beets, which look exactly how they sound. They are red and white stripes. They're so beautiful and so sweet. And then, of course, we have red beets that are beautiful. And they're both very mild and sweet, and they have a lot of water in them. And anything that has a lot of water, 90%, we know has a lot of fiber, because that fiber keeps all of the water there. With all the fiber, anything that beautiful and colorful is not lacking in nutrition. Beets are packed with folate, which is vitamin B9 that helps with our red blood cell construction. It helps with healthy cellular growth and cellular function. Folate does lots of important jobs for us. Manganese, which has important jobs for your immune system and your reproductive health and blood clotting and nutrient metabolism, lots of jobs for manganese too. And it also has copper. Copper is kind of interesting because copper shares a receptor with zinc. And zinc gets all the hype. It has like all the reputation, and copper gets the backseat for some reason. But copper is really important for your immune system. It also has an important job protecting your nerve cells. So I'm not recommending that you supplement with copper. I don't know if that's a good idea either. But the reason you shouldn't over supplement with zinc, we now see that more commonly because of what happened with COVID, and we saw that zinc was helpful. But when you over supplement with zinc, you crowd out your receptors for copper. Copper doesn't get space, right, to be absorbed. And it can increase your risk of copper deficiency. And we know that copper is also very critical for your immune health. So your body likes homeostasis. You need all things in moderation. Beets are also a significant source of dietary nitrates. In the medical world, we call that nitric oxide because it is showing some very powerful potential to help with your blood pressure. And so that can, of course, decrease your risk of having a heart attack or stroke, but probably where it is the most impactful in the medical field is with neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, because nitrates improve your blood flow to your brain, particularly your frontal lobe, which helps with higher level decision making and even your working memory. So just like those isothiocyanates with the radishes, the medical field pharmaceutical industry hasn't yet captured their long-standing goal of encapsulating this in a way that keeps it stable so that it can be used. But in the meantime, beets are a really good option. It's also showing great potential in the field of sports nutrition because of the way that dietary nitrates helps you utilize oxygen and help with endurance and especially decision making during athletic performance. So that's pretty cool when you think about a basketball player or a football player that has to make split decisions. And the studies that are demonstrating this are pretty compelling and pretty exciting. That beautiful color is led by a compound called betanin, And betanin is not broken down by the body, which you may have noticed, because if you eat a lot of beets, other things turn red, maybe causing you a moment to freak out until you realize that you have beets. And that effect is totally harmless, and it should be noted that it has some pretty phenomenal anti-inflammatory properties, and that can benefit a lot of conditions, obesity, cancer, heart disease, kidney, liver disease, kind of hits all the big ones. And that color is so effective that food manufacturers figured out finally how to duplicate it, and even though it doesn't come with all of the other benefits, betanin still has its own realm of influence, and it is a beautiful food dye. They renamed it beetroot red, which I like that at least they gave credit to Beets. But just an indication of how amazing vegetables are. Beetroot red also doubles as an antimicrobial agent, so it helps preserve the food. So it's very effective in the food industry. A little more expensive than food dye, which is why you don't see it all the time, but it's great at a number of things. So we're going to dive into our first recipe of the day, which is a vegan beet chocolate pudding. Yes?
Just real quick, so back to the nutrition. If you cook beets or if you juice raw beets,
Yeah.
does the cooking of beets change the nutrition?
Yeah, well, how you cook it will certainly influence that variable. So if you boil it, you're going to lose more of the betanin, and that is water soluble. So I would recommend steaming it or oven roasting it versus boiling, because a lot more of that will leach into the water unless you repurpose the water. So you could retain that and add it to a soup or something like that. But yeah, I think you have greater potential of capturing it in a dry heat method.
So juicing raw beets, is that?
So juicing, I mean, yeah, you would absorb everything that is water soluble. You wouldn't get the fiber, which is like really good for you, so that's the downside of juicing. But fiber isn't super helpful for everybody, so I think there's like a time and a place for that, right? If your gut is like talking to you and if that's something that would make you really uncomfortable, like maybe juicing would be a preferable alternative. Because at least you would still absorb a lot of that nutrition. Yes. Any other questions about beets? So, yes, we're going to dive into first recipe of the day by doing something your mother always told you not to do, which is to have dessert first. Because Ernestine Olmer told us life is uncertain. And you should sometimes have dessert first. This is a chocolate pudding featuring beets, which curiously seem to deepen the flavor of the cocoa. And I think that's what I love about it. It definitely has an earthy undertone. It looks a little bit like red velvet, but it is surprising. It's a nutritious spin on dessert. It's very creamy. It's very rich. And if you are feeling up to the challenge, it yields 4 servings, but probably 6 more appropriate servings because of how rich it is. And I'm going to show you how easy it is, because if you've been here the last 3 months, you know that I always like to have a blender recipe for those of you who feel intimidated by cooking, because this is a no-cook. Well, actually, you would need to soften your beets. So in that way, maybe you do have to cook a little bit. But I steamed the beets when I did this. And you need a couple avocados. That's where the majority of your fat and creaminess is going to come from. Avocados have been so good lately. And then you're going to need a half a cup of cocoa powder. This is 100% unsweetened cocoa powder. Lots of polyphenols and antioxidants in this bag. And
I have a question.
Yes.
Where did you get that, over at Trader Joe's?
I did. I got this at Trader Joe's. Yeah. Some cinnamon. My favorite source for cinnamon is Penzeys because I love their curries. But they have a really wonderful cinnamon as well. And some maple syrup. So yes, there is some added sugar in this recipe, which we're going to talk about in a minute. A pinch of sea salt and coconut milk, which I am not proud of. It needed the that because it's dessert. So if you can find a way around this, more power to you. Please tell me all about it. But some things just, they call for fat. So I did try this with a light coconut milk alternative. And so that you don't need to be blasted by the noise, I'm gonna hand this off. And the pudding was just a lot thinner. So I think actually if you froze it, that might be your greatest potential because you can freeze this instead of chill it and serve it as an ice cream. And it's gonna have a little bit more of a sorbet texture with a lower fat alternative. The avocado will still make it rich and creamy, so you don't have to have all that fat. But if you serve it as a pudding, I think it helps. So yeah.
What if maybe you added tapioca to it?
Ooh, good idea. Try it out and let me know about it. All right. My family can only eat so much chocolate pudding. They're like, not again. I thought it was really good. I mean, they did too. It's just you can only handle so much. So yeah, make sure that you're peeling, chopping, and steaming those beets until they're pork tender. If they're not pork tender, that pudding's not going to be that creamy. So just forewarn you on that. Kind of combine everything in the blender, make sure it's super smooth, and then chill it, or like I said, you can freeze it and make some ice cream. And then you have to figure out how you're going to top it. So the reason I like that picture on the introductory slide for the recipe is that they use an edible flour, and I thought that was a really good idea. So if you're looking for something without any added sugar or fat or whatever, an edible flour is a beautiful way of garnishing a dish. That's very pleasant, right? Thanks, David. But I chose crème fraîche because I love crème fraîche. I'm like the hugest fan of crème fraîche. It goes on everything, and you can very easily make a vegan crème fraîche with cashews. In fact, all it is cashews and some salt and a little bit of lime juice. And I put the recipe on the back table in case you're curious. I'm super impatient, so I don't soak my cashews, but you could do that. I just boil them until they're nice and soft. Put them in the blender with some lime juice, and voila, you have crème fraîche. But you can certainly buy, an alternative in the store. It's harder to find a vegan option. And then you get to modify the texture. So a thick crème fraîche is better for fruit and pudding. There you go. Wow. But a thinner crème fraîche would be better on like corn on the cob, or to use as a salad dressing, or drizzled over any number of savory things. I added 1 tablespoon of sugar for 2 cups of cashews. So there's like a very small amount of sugar to offset the tartness, but you could amp that up and add some more sweetener to make your crème fraîche sweeter. I just felt like with pudding it was sweet enough. And then of course I shaved some dark chocolate over the pudding because it's even prettier and better with more chocolate. But you could also pair this pudding with some rock salt. You could add some coconut whipped cream. There's roasted pistachios. There's any number of modifications that you could do to enhance your pudding. Any questions about chocolate pudding? Yes.
Is cocoa powder, is that different than cocoa powder?
Semantics, maybe? I think it's the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think cocoa, how we understand it, is probably more often than not sweetened. But cocoa, I think it's just pronunciation. Yeah. Sounds fancier if you say cocoa. Yeah, just make sure it's not sweetened, and if it was, then I wouldn't add maple syrup to it. Cocoa is pretty bitter. Maybe I'm not sure it's you. I remember this video on social media of a kid eating a spoonful of like pure cocoa powder, and here they thought they were getting something really good. You can see his face. I think it like he coughed and it came out his nose. He's like, what is this? Okay. Yeah.
The use of coconut milk seems to be controversial.
Yeah.
From what I've researched, there are many different types of saturated fats. The short chain and medium chain are not necessarily bad for you and can be beneficial. Long chains that contain animal saturated fats, of course, have shown not to be beneficial. But have you done a presentation on the different types of saturated fats?
Yeah, well, we talked a lot about fats in January, and we did cover animal versus plant-based fats, saturated versus unsaturated, and I think that, you know, fat is a big spectrum. Saturated fat, in general, is not advantageous. The saturated fat in coconut is so saturated, it's more saturated than lard. But yes, it doesn't have the disadvantage of being from an animal-based source. So it doesn't promote systemic inflammation like an animal-based saturated fat would. However, it will still impact your lipid profile and have the potential for raising your triglycerides and your LDL cholesterol. So I would say less is more. Like if you had a great alternative, I would probably offer an unsaturated fat, but it's certainly a better alternative than lard, even though it's more saturated than lard.
But there are lots of plant-based saturated fats like avocado and coconut, etc., that are beneficial. And those are all short chain or medium chain. So
Yeah,
I think the jury's still out on that.
We'll see. Yeah. Yeah, avocado oil is actually one of my favorite cooking oils because it is a monounsaturated fat. It's very stable like coconut fat is. But I think the benefit of the monounsaturated fat outweighs whatever saturated fat it contains. So just lives on a big spectrum, I think. So it'd be interesting to learn more. Yeah.
If we were to use the ice cream maker to make like a sorbet, what alternate milk? Would almond milk work for that?
Yeah, almond milk, oat milk. In fact, sometimes depending on your beets, this pudding can even run a little bit dry. And so I think opting for a neutral flavored dairy-free milk is a great supplement. So when I made it, actually the last time my beets were on the dry side, I had seen them the day prior, and then I used them on the day that I made it. And I used oat milk, and you couldn't determine a change in the texture. Like the consistency was still the same. So if you find that to be the case, I imagine that almond milk would be great too. Probably doesn't matter. There's like so much fat in it that it's already creamy. You know, you just need it to blenderize. Okay.
I had a quick question. This is very good. Thank you. We're great. Peel, chop, and stem. Steve, you've been doing this all month. What's the best way to cook them? Is it cook them, then peel them and chop them?
Yeah, I think probably sticking them in the oven and then taking off the peel is the easiest, but it requires a longer cooking time. So if you are tight on time, steaming them would be the most efficient way of doing it, but you have to peel them first. I left the greens on, so I had a nice crumble, and then I peeled them that way, and then I chopped the top off after the fact. Because otherwise it's like really hard, and this is what you see when you like buy them from the store, right? It's like really hard to peel them when they're in the palm of your hand without like cutting yourself or being worried about that at least. So I thought like having a crumble made that more efficient. But yeah, I think the easiest way to do it probably is chopping off the top, sticking them in the oven, and then just like taking off the peel. The roasted beets are not that way because they needed surface area to absorb the honey and the balsamic vinegar. And so you could do that and then chop them and mix them with a sauce, but it really helps to like cook the sauce into them. So it's a little more time intensive up front.
What temperature would you use in the oven and how long? Maybe?
I am gonna go there next. That'll be our next recipe. Yeah, so we're coming in.
You're just a little ahead.
Spoiler alert, yeah. Sorry.
One way too around peeling is just using a scrub pad. And
Oh,
it
okay.
takes off
Yeah.
just the roughness, like you don't even have to
that's a
peel.
good-
Where were you a month ago?
Yeah.
I know you were
Looking
here
Beets.
actually.
Yeah, I think I kind of do what you do. I
Cool.
take off the green,
Yeah.
the dark thick, and then I do the extra the bottom, and then I will scrub it really well to get any dirt off. And it doesn't hurt you to have the skin on.
Yeah. No, it's more insoluble fiber,
Yeah.
which, great.
Okay.
You know, yeah. Yeah. Especially if everyone around your table is okay with the texture, you know, I mean, that's great.
As long as you get the dirt off.
Yeah. All right. The sugar spectrum. So you still might be thinking dessert first or adding sugar to the beets. Isn't all the sugar bad for me? And I want to use this as a segue into our nutrition topic of the day on carbohydrates, because carbohydrates live on a substantial spectrum, just like everything else. So here's a little diagram of their molecular structure. And at the top, and the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's relevant to understand the how and the why as we piece the puzzle together of carbohydrate metabolism and how they impact our health. So at the top here, this little guy, it's a little blurry on the, what is this called? Yes. But it's called a monosaccharide, and there's a whole class of monosaccharides. But our most common form of that is something called glucose or sugar. It's also called dextrose. And glucose is our fundamental unit of sugar. So everything, or most everything, breaks down into fundamental units of sugar. And glucose is the star player in every carbohydrate. By itself, it is super sweet, because the more simple those carbohydrate trains are, the more sweet they are. And you can buy it by itself. In fact, if you have diabetes or you know somebody close to you that has diabetes, likely have a pack of glucose tablets, which is 15 grams of glucose in your purse or in your truck, just in case that blood sugar dives too low and you need to correct it just like that, because that's exactly what glucose does. It brings your blood sugar up. It corrects your blood sugar to keep it hopefully within a normal range. And at the end of the day, that glucose is really critical for our survival because it empowers us in everything that we do. It is the energy that we need for our heart to beat, and for our brain to think, and our lungs to breathe, and our muscles to move. It is our fundamental unit of energy. It's so important that your body has a plight to maintain a pool of blood sugar that can be available to give us energy for those important functions all the time. So in a person without diabetes, that pool is tightly regulated between 70 and 110 milligrams per deciliter. And sometimes it goes a little higher, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but hopefully it doesn't go too much lower than that. And if it does, then your brain will tell you that you need to eat when you're hungry. You need to refill the tank. So let's just say that you're on a hike, a long hike, and it's been about an hour, and oops, you forgot a granola bar, you forgot a little snack to top you off when you start feeling hungry. You might, in fact, start feeling a little hangry, because it's my favorite term for hunger and anger mixed together. Because when your blood sugar gets low, your brain, which is a very greedy source of energy, it actually consumes more than half of your blood sugar, will tell you that you need to eat. And starting to get mad that you didn't bring your granola bar. And if you didn't have a snack, your body, being the resourceful machine that it is, will compensate for that because it prepared for this moment. It stored it away just in case your blood sugar went too low and you wouldn't feel it, right? So it stored it in the muscle, it's called glycogen, and it stored it in your liver, also called glycogen. Just in case your blood sugar got too low, it could break some down from where it stored it and make sure your blood sugar stays within the normal range. So that is in a person without diabetes. And that will always be the case. Even if you decide, because your friends talk to you and say, I'm going on a ketogenic diet. For those of you who are not familiar, ketogenic diet is 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbohydrate. That's a really small amount of carbs. So there's very little that is thought to be broken down and turned into blood sugar. That is like 2 pieces of bread over the course of the entire day. That's the only carbohydrates that you're getting, or maybe 1 large potato. But even on a ketogenic diet, your blood sugar will still be 70 to 110 milligrams per deciliter. It's always kept there. In fact, might be a little on the higher side because of the fat in your diet tends to make your blood sugar go up a little bit. So now if you're going up the chain, you're gonna see disaccharides. Those are 2 monosaccharides put together, and those are found in sugars like table sugar. Sucrose is found in lactose. That is the carbohydrate that is in milk. Milk is a carbohydrate. It is broken down into sugar. And then of course it's found in fruits, which have fibers and stuff added to it. And then the next class of carbohydrates is the biggest. That's our polysaccharides. That literally turns to a bunch of sugars all stuck together. And on the spectrum of those, on the one hand you have refined carbohydrates. Those things still break down and become sugar very quickly. And those are starchy, refined carbohydrates. But as those chains get longer, they get stronger, they get more resilient, they get more complicated, and they become fiber. And fiber is so strong, it's so resilient, that it doesn't get absorbed for energy at all. You only digest it, and that's it. So you can't break down fiber to become sugar. So that there's a lot of very nutritious, healthy carbohydrates in that classification. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay, so some of you who are familiar with this may be thinking, wow, it sounds like the glycemic index, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, because the glycemic index is a tool that we use to measure how quickly a carbohydrate that we eat becomes blood sugar. So how quickly does that carb break down and become usable energy in our blood? And a lot of what separates these foods are fiber. So you can see at the very top, this sets the bar. Glucose, 100. That's the fastest thing that becomes blood sugar. Near the bottom, we have non-starchy vegetables, which is under 20, because fiber is still considered a carbohydrate, right? But it becomes sugar only if there is a carbohydrate that's not fiber in that fibrous food, which is almost always the case. And then proteins and fats don't break down into sugar at all. So mostly what separates these foods is the amount of fiber that's in them. Because fiber forms this like gel in your stomach, it absorbs water, it slows things down, and it takes a lot longer for that fibrous food that has usable energy to become usable energy. It slows down your digestion. So obviously all types of sugar are not created equal, right? And I can't think of a better example than fructose. So right after the top here of glucose, you have high fructose corn syrup. That is an industrialized sugar. And they figured out, leave it to science, to figure out in the 1960s how to make cheaper sugar that tastes so sweet and has very little flavor fatigue, meaning people love it again and again and again. They don't get sick of it. And that's high fructose corn syrup. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have an apple, high fructose corn syrup. So on the other end of the spectrum here, you have an apple, 36. It's pretty low, especially considering how sweet an apple is, right? Well, fructose in nature is a monosaccharide like glucose that is super sweet and comes from fruits. That is the primary way that we see fructose in nature. What's really interesting about fructose is that when fructose is metabolized, there's like a lot of pathways in metabolism for fructose. Almost all of the end products are fatty acids. It's not sugar. So when you eat a lot of fructose, you manufacture fatty acids. Totally different metabolism than glucose. But I don't think that eating a lot of fruit is gonna make more fat mass. That's not really how that works, right? Fruit has so much, yeah, it has fructose, but it has so much fiber, it has so much water. You would be so full long before you would actively be gaining fat mass. But where this matters to you is when they started industrializing it, like this guy, the high fructose corn syrup. Because now you can inhale a Coca-Cola in like 5 minutes, and all that fructose is generating fatty acid production. So yes, some of it will hit your blood sugar, and the way in fact they created this product, it was glucose and fructose mixed together, and it's an unnatural ratio. It's not a ratio that your body would recognize. The amount of glucose in it actually expedites fructose absorption. So not only does it hit your blood sugar real hard and real fast, way faster than normal fructose does, but the vast majority of the fructose in it is still going to go towards making fat, making fatty acids. So next slide. You might be thinking, well, actually back one, yeah, sugar metabolism. So you might be thinking, well, I don't have diabetes, that doesn't apply to me. And I think in order to better address that question, it's important to understand how we metabolize sugar in the first place. So for starters, anytime we eat a carb, we now know that breaks down into sugar at various speeds, right? And once it's dumping into your blood as sugar, there's a new player that enters the picture, and that's insulin. And insulin has some important jobs, but more than anything, it's kind of like a high-end driving service. So for the sake of this analogy, I'm going to call insulin a concierge Uber. And the concierge Uber is going to see sugar there and drive over and pick them up. And they're going to take a little ride to get home. And that home for sugar is a cell, because your body can't actually use sugar when it's in the blood. It's just there, right? It has to get it inside that cell in order to make energy happen. So insulin, concierge Uber, is going to drive sugar over to whatever cell needs energy, and it's going to pull up to the front door and let sugar out like a true gentleman, walk her to the door, knock on the door, and Uber is so special, that insulin Uber is so special, he even has a key, he has a special way of opening that door. And he's gonna be the one that lets sugar in. Sugar can't get into the cell without Uber insulin. So they are good friends. So there are some foods that affect how easily insulin can open up that door. So can you jump to the next slide? So foods that improve insulin sensitivity, that process of opening up that door is called sensitivity, insulin sensitivity. Foods that help that are polyphenols. So those are foods that are really rich in polyphenols, like berries, broccoli. Those are probably two of the most richest food in polyphenols. And what's really interesting about polyphenols is a lot of them are carbohydrates. Berries, it's total carbohydrate, right? So on its own, it still affects your blood sugar, but what's so amazing about berries is that when you add it to a high glycemic food like instant oatmeal hits your blood sugar really fast. But if you add berries to your instant oatmeal, all of a sudden that drops its glycemic index value by like 30 points. It's amazing, right? Add a carbohydrate and it improves the glycemic index of your food. Yeah.
With the instant oatmeal, is it because there's sugar in it, or is that just the nature of the oatmeal?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah, the oats are refined, which is what makes them instant. They cook really quickly because there's less fiber in them, and usually there's sugar added to it. So a sugary pack of instant oatmeal will have a glycemic index value close to high fructose corn syrup. Does not make it a bad food. It just breaks down into sugar really quickly. So it helps to add things like berries to kind of slow it down, maybe walnuts or other foods. Yeah.
I know I've been staying away from oatmeal just because I haven't had diabetes very long. So does it make a difference whether it's processed or unprocessed oatmeal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And The short answer is yes, definitely. So the longer your oatmeal takes to cook, the more fiber it has, and therefore the lower the glycemic index value is. So you're less likely to get that big roller coaster effect that the previous slide showed, and we're gonna go back to it. But it still has a relatively high glycemic index value for being such a good, wholesome, fibrous food. So I still think adding berries to it would be advantageous. So polyphenols, vinegar dramatically improves insulin sensitivity. The studies on vinegar are very promising. And this is mostly true for acetic acid, which is apple cider vinegar, and balsamic vinegar, but you can apply it to most other acids too, even lemon juice can have that effect. And again, it can improve the glycemic index value by as much as 20 or 35 points even. So I would find sustainable ways of doing that, adding it in your salad dressing, for instance, or on top of your roasted vegetables today. That would be another way, but it doesn't mean you have to drink it. If you felt really compelled to drink it, because this is a big struggle for you, make sure you dilute it with water, please, and have it with a meal, so you don't give yourself an ulcer and blame me. And then exercise also dramatically improves insulin sensitivity. Probably more than anything else, it helps that insulin get the job of getting sugar inside the cell to be used as energy very efficiently. And then lastly, morning meals. In fact, our insulin sensitivity is very fast in the earlier part of the day. So if you really have a hankering for, I don't know, a big old cookie or instant oatmeal or pancakes or something very high on the glycemic index, the best time of the day for you to tolerate that meal is in the morning. Because even at night, when your insulin sensitivity drops substantially, you can still see that impact the next morning. In fact, if you have labs done and your doctor is checking your glycosylated hemoglobin, that's called your HbA1c, it's like a 3-month overview of your blood sugar, or maybe a fasting blood sugar or something like that. It's a very routine lab. I wouldn't go to bed with a bowl of cereal. Bowl of cereal is not part of your dessert plan, or any high glycemic food for that matter, because your fasting blood sugar will show it the next morning. So better not to have dessert the night before you get labs. And it is a false indicator. It's not even truly reflective of what's going on. So you do yourself a disservice in that way. Foods that decrease insulin sensitivity. So that means that insulin, that concierge Uber service got sugar to the cell, it can't open the door. The door is jammed. Maybe the key's not working. And eventually it will open the door, but it takes a long time, longer than it should. And there's a consequence for that, which I'll explain in a minute. Saturated fat decreases insulin sensitivity. That's why on a ketogenic diet, blood sugars seem to be curiously high. You think, I'm not eating any carbohydrate, why is my blood sugar high? It's because saturated fat decreases insulin sensitivity. Animal protein also has the same impact. Not as severely as the saturated fat, but foods that are concentrated in branched chain amino acids specifically decrease insulin sensitivity. And then lastly, evening and late night meals. And that's probably why we see higher prevalence of weight gain and obesity with people that consume meals later in the day, especially in the evening hours before bed. Saturated fat can almost double the amount of insulin required. I have that note. I wanted to share that. Pretty amazing. So we're going to go back to the previous slide. There's your sugar metabolism. So that graph shows 2 lines. The red line is something very delicious, I'm sure. And it's spiked your blood sugar. And so I'm thinking about the perfect storm here, and what comes to mind is some fried chicken and some instant mashed potatoes, and just to wash it all down, a nice old Coca-Cola. not diet Coca-Cola, but the real deal. And I'm sure that you'll enjoy every single bite of it. But you might be starting at a nice healthy blood sugar of 88, maybe just below 90, which is totally within normal range. But within 30 minutes, and this is a person without diabetes, okay? Within 30 minutes, boop, all the way up to 140, maybe more, depending on your insulin sensitivity. That was a perfect storm because instant mashed potatoes, we know, is really high on the glycemic index, becomes sugar like that. And then the fat in the chicken made you insulin resistant, so you couldn't handle all that sugar, big old influx like that. And the chicken has branched chain amino acids. Again, that decreases your insulin sensitivity. You got a big glycemic load right there. And that's not uncommon. And that triggers a big chain of events. This rise right here triggers all kinds of inflammatory markers to go up in your blood. You can test for that. It also forces your body to make a big decision. So aside from the inflammatory markers right here, all that sugar is kind of irritating on your cells. It's just kind of hanging out, can't be used. And your body needs to decide, can I use it? Am I in a fasting state right now? I was at 88. I wasn't in a fasting state. So I can use some of it maybe, but all the rest of it, I'm going to store that. So then it has to decide, well, how fasting was I? Is my glycogen stores depleted right now? Have I been fasting for a long time? And maybe you can utilize some as glycogen in your muscles and your liver, just in case your blood sugar gets low later, which it almost does. And then the rest of it is going to get stored as fat. It's just going to make fatty acids. And that is where we see inflammation show its ugly head because those fatty acids increase other inflammatory markers. So what happens next, unfortunately, is no better. Now your body sees that sugar and it calls the Uber. It throws insulin at the problem. And overcorrections are more common than not. When you get huge, quick, acute influxes like that, your body responds acutely and doesn't make the perfect amount of insulin. In fact, it's almost always too much. And if you've heard that sugar feeds cancer, you are kind of right, because every cell in your body eats sugar for energy. That's just like the nature of cells, whether it's a cancer cell or a healthy cell. But the real problem is insulin, because insulin is a growth hormone. And so you only want what's critically necessary. Whatever excess insulin you have, that is like gasoline for the cancer fire. So you want to avoid those huge influxes of insulin also. It's not necessarily just the sugar, it's also the insulin. So if you're insulin at the problem, and not all the insulin is able to do its job really well, because we know there's insulin sensitivity going on too that is decreased. And so now, boom, it dropped, right? You're even lower than where you started, and it hasn't even been 2 hours, you're at 90 minutes. And what happens when you get a low? Your brain thinks you're hungry. Maybe you just inhaled 2,000 calories and already an hour and a half later, you're hungry. So obviously you need to eat, right, to bring your blood sugar back up. And I think that's where this is like a self-perpetuating cycle with a high glycemic meal, is that even though you had sufficiency of energy there, you need to eat again to bring up your blood sugar. So contrary to that, let's look at that nice green light, nice soft rise and fall, only about 10 to 20 points above. And that is your low glycemic index meal. So let's say we're having roasted beets and greens and some black bean tacos. What's interesting about all those foods, they're all carbohydrates, all of them, but they have so much fiber that with all that fiber, you have slow gastric emptying, your body can make the perfect amount of insulin, and you get this nice soft rise, nice soft fall. You're not hungry. Your blood sugar never even crossed the point where you started. And all of those wholesome plant-based foods primed your cells for insulin. So the insulin that was made, which was the perfect amount, does a beautiful job at efficiently getting those sugars into your cells so you can use as energy. So now you know all about sugar metabolism. And before you are hard on yourself about the fried chicken that you ate before you came to this class, the Coca-Cola that you used to wash it down, we are biologically wired to prefer sweet food. That's how we evolved. Of course, we evolved on fruit, not Fruit Loops, but you're biologically wired to prefer easy energy. Fat too. Fat is the most energy dense food, so it makes sense that we prefer energy dense, quickly uses energy food. But the food industry is taking advantage of us, our pleasure and their profit, and has certainly, perpetuated the cycle. And so I think we just have to be not just conscious, aware consumers, but really intentional about having wholesome meals so that we can get to this green light and not the red. Right? Yeah.
So mashed potatoes, is it the potatoes or is it like the oatmeal where they put too much other things in it?
Both. So the potato is just refined into a powder, right? So they took all the starchy, simple polysaccharides and concentrated them without the water or fiber that would otherwise slow digestion. And obviously you add water to it, but it's in already such a refined state that it just breaks down into sugar really quickly. And then I'm sure the things they add to it don't help that process. Because usually fat is added to it as well, depending on the product maybe.
So is a baked
And that would
potato
decrease.
then somewhat problematic or not at all?
That's a really good question. Is a baked potato problematic? So russet potatoes are probably on one end of the spectrum. They have the least amount of fiber inside and outside. The peel is usually what compensates for a potato, and the peel is just naturally lower in insoluble fiber, which slows our digestion the most. And so it would have a bigger glycemic impact than something that has a thicker peel, like maybe a yam. But the potato that has the lowest glycemic index is actually a purple potato, the kind that's purple all the way through, because it has the very most, good job Matt, because it has the very most polyphenols, and we know now that polyphenols improve our insulin sensitivity. And so insulin does a better job at clearing your blood sugar quickly because of the purple inside. So the more colorful the potatoes, the lower the glycemic impact, and the thicker the peel, the lower the glycemic index value.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Fiber, so today. It's difficult to summarize the amazing benefits of fiber. It does so many wonderful jobs for us. But this is my abbreviated list of the top 5 most critical things that it helps us with. So obviously it's found naturally in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. Basically all whole plant-based foods have lots of fiber in them, unless we intentionally take it out through our processing. But fiber helps you digest your food. There's insoluble fiber, which in general, rule of thumb, lives on the outside of the vegetable or the fruit, and soluble fiber lives on the inside. It's what absorbs water in the produce. The insoluble fiber is kind of like a broom for your gut, helps things move along, and soluble fiber helps absorb water in your gut to do much of the same job. And in that way, it helps us regulate. It helps our gut regulate itself. It optimizes blood sugar, as we now know. It optimizes healthy weight loss and healthy weight management. I have seen a lot of patients over the years for weight management, and it is a struggle. It is a biochemical struggle, which you saw a small glimpse of that from that roller coaster of blood sugar. But the number one most effective, most sustainable method for weight loss is high fiber. I don't focus on taking foods out of their diet. I challenge them, how much fiber can you put into your diet? And we'll go over the dietary guidelines for fiber, but in general, The more fiber, the better. I just would work up to it. Like Rome wasn't built overnight, and you don't want to be a gas bomb either. So work up to it slowly. Teach your gut how to digest the fiber, and it will certainly help you in return. Fiber feeds the symbiotic bacteria in your gut. We call that prebiotics. All fiber are considered prebiotics. Some are more impactful than others. Please don't spend your money on a bottle of prebiotics because you can eat an apple. It's way cheaper and way more effective. But there are more bacteria in your gut than there are human cells in your body. That is such an important piece of us. And we call that your gut microbiome. But your gut microbiome metabolizes food. They enhance our immune function. An big part of your immune system lives in the microbiome of your gut. And they manufacture all kinds of nutrients. They manufacture vitamin K and almost all of the B vitamins. And so fiber helps that gut bacteria thrive and do these important jobs for us. It truly is a symbiotic relationship. And they decrease LDL cholesterol as well. So how much is enough? Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends a long-standing consensus of 45 to 65% of your total daily calories. So that is upwards of 900 to 1,300 calories on a standard 2,000 calorie diet, which is more than 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day. It's a lot of carbs. I probably actually more than that, to be totally honest with you. But I don't think the amount matters. I think that's almost irrelevant. What matters is the type of carbs, right? Way more important than the quantity or the volume is where you're getting those carbohydrates from. Unfortunately, we don't have a dietary recommendation or requirement for free added sugar. They're working really hard to accomplish one. But we can lean on two organizations for that. World Health Organization and the American Heart Association both agree that this is a problem. This is a problem for us, especially when we started industrializing sugar in the 1960s. Because if you're wondering what, sorry, adjust this. If you're wondering what the American Heart Association has to do with sugar, like why do they care? That is a big independent risk factor for heart disease and stroke. And you may remember that big rise in blood sugar I pointed out generated all kinds of inflammatory markers and fatty acid production. That is a direct link right there to our vascular wellness. So they care very much, and they agree that free sugar intake should be less than 5% of your total calories, which for most people is not even one can of soda in a whole day. It's the only free added sugar. Never mind like the little chocolate you had after dinner, or like the Starbucks that you grabbed that morning. That's only about 100 calories worth of free added sugar. And so they are on a plight to decrease that, and unfortunately we can't rely on most organizations to give us a healthy amount or a healthy idea, because Big Sugar, the industry, which we have named Big Sugar, is very influential with the money that they use to manipulate our consensus guidelines. Even the American Diabetes Association has been very skewed in their recommendations, which of all organizations, the American Diabetes Association should come through for us. But unfortunately, they've been really influenced by that. And then Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the World Health Organization consensus for fiber is minimum 25 grams a day for women, 35 grams a day for men. But the more the better. I would aim for 50. Just don't do it overnight. And we've learned that fiber is grossly deficient in most people's diet. 97% of Americans from our last health survey, which was published in 2020, we had 400,000 participants in that. 97% of them were grossly deficient in fiber. So that's our problem nutrient right there. You have to be intentional about pursuing it. So if you feel like this applies to you, especially with free added sugar, I challenge you to a 2-week sugar challenge. And that means taking out all artificial sweeteners and all free added sugars from your diet. And you can train your taste preferences, which is what's really cool about your taste buds. They are very adaptable, just like with salt, if you've ever had to do a low salt diet. And in 2 weeks, I guarantee you that whatever your challenge is, if you feel like you have too many free added sugars in your diet, it'll taste too sweet to you. So it's a worthwhile challenge if you feel like you have a sweet tooth and you need to get that under control. I don't know, is it? Okay, probably. We'll turn it down over. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, any questions about sugar?
Just the free sugar is like white sugar, honey.
Yeah.
You know, all that is listed, right?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it is isolated sugar. So natural sugar would be like fruit. That's totally fine. And wouldn't be concerned about that at all. But, you know, sugar, free added sugar also lives on the spectrum. So nutrition and of glycemic impact. On one hand, you have corn syrup. It has a glycemic index of probably 75. High fructose corn syrup, we know, is like 90. It's close to like glucose. Maple syrup is probably 60. Honey is probably 50. Date sugar is lower, 40. Agave nectar is like 10 to 20. It's the lowest glycemic index of any. Date sugar, though, and molasses has tons of antioxidants. So if you're looking for a nutritional impact, that might be a great addition to your diet. But from purely a glycemic index value, agave nectar is the lowest of all the free added sugars.
So what about the stevia plant versus the stevia, the sugar that's out there? And they have the organic, and then they also have the regular. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I used to be a big fan of stevia. It seemed like the perfect alternative, and I think it's still a good option if the intake is really moderate, but I would keep it to probably 1 serving a day. Because they've found with these population studies that address specifically artificial sweeteners that in abundance, like everything else, right, in abundance, it had some mutagenic effects that changed our DNA and made it very concerning. And so in moderation, I think it's totally fine, but I would just be really mindful of that. Artificial sweeteners, I desperately tried to find one that was like good all the way around, but unfortunately, a lot of them are difficult. They all have a catch somewhere. And a lot of those, of course, apply to, you know, abundance, right? Of course, you're eating something that is intensely sweet in abundance. It's a concern of toxicity. Now, in a more broad way, just to address artificial sweeteners, we used to think that, you know, it's like a trick on our metabolism, and our metabolism said, our body said, hey, you just drank like what should be 200 calories worth of energy, and it wasn't, so I'm gonna overcompensate for that. We'll make up for that. And so that was a problem, but now we see these correlations with weight gain that are less tied to overcorrections and more tied to our flavor preferences. So just like that 2-week sugar challenge I mentioned, if you are consuming artificial sweeteners regularly, that most of them are like 600 times sweeter than normal sugar, you train your brain to prefer those intensely sweet flavors. So you are much more likely to prefer sweet food in general. And that's probably where it catches up to us the most. Taste buds are so adaptable. Okay. Let's move on to our next recipe. So, balsamic roasted beets. I found this recipe from Joy Food Sunshine, which is an online database for plant-based recipes. And they have lots of actually wonderfully roasted vegetables. Prep time, 5 minutes, unless it takes you longer to peel those beets. And they cook for probably 40 minutes. And you can optionally add in the greens if your greens look good from the beets that you pick at the farm. But the honey and the balsamic cook into the beets to create a real crowd pleaser at your table. So I started off, next slide, thank you. I started off with more than 3 large beets. Thank you so much to Leah and our awesome team of volunteers for harvesting these and peeling and chopping them for you. And sky's the limit, you just need more sauce. So if you have 20 beets or whatever, you just would compensate for that with how much sauce you make. I am roasting these in avocado oil because it is better for high temperature cooking. We're gonna roast these at 425 degrees. That's over the smoke point for even a refined olive oil. And sprinkle it with a little bit of sea salt before you pop it into the oven. And while they are cooking, you are going to mix up your sauce, the balsamic vinegar and cream. And I am a huge fan of really good balsamic vinegar. So this is from Wheat Olive. It's an aged balsamic, and it should pour like syrup. It's almost like a balsamic reduction. If there is one expensive pantry staple that I recommend, it is a high quality balsamic vinegar because it will make or break your dish. And a smaller, more reasonable, we clearly have a lot of balsamic vinegar in our diet, but a more reasonable size bottle, which is 375 mils, just like a standard olive oil, is $25, $26 from Wheat Olive. Yeah.
You can just make it yourself on a stove.
You could, yes, you absolutely could. Yeah, and that's more closely to a reduction. This is a nice cheat, and it is a balsamic reduction from Trader Joe's. They call it a glaze, and it'll give you a similar texture. But if your balsamic vinegar at home pours like water and is kind of sour, then I don't think it's gonna help. It won't shine in this recipe. So I think it's a wonderful investment. And Leah actually is gonna cook our greens for us. The greens are probably even more nutritious than the beet root itself. Greens are so good for you. They are kind of high in oxalates, not nearly as high as spinach. And they cook down really quickly, but they are a wonderful source of fiber. They have copper, calcium. They have potassium and iron and manganese, and a lot of B vitamins, phosphorus. They're loaded with antioxidants, even more antioxidants than those beautiful purple beets. So if you can retain them, I highly recommend it. I wonder if actually we should get a little bowl so that we can, yeah. So if you're gonna do the greens, then obviously the cooking method is different for the beets themselves. Actually, can you turn the slide? You're basically just tossing them in oil and salting them. And then after they cook for a while, next slide, you are gonna pull them out. And when they are, you're gonna stir them halfway through. And then when they are close to being done, about 10 minutes shy of being done, they should be nice and pork tender by then. That's when you're gonna mix them in your balsamic and your honey. Because it's that last 10 minutes or so that makes them braised, right? That it cooks into the vegetable. But with the greens, wow, look at all these gorgeous greens that you guys get to eat. With the greens, you're gonna just add it while it's sauteing. So I would wait until it cooks down a little bit. And I got this honey. We had some honey from the farm, but everyone went crazy over it. Unless there's like a secret stash somewhere at Matt's house. I'm just kidding. But I got this honey from Nature's Touch, which is one of my favorite little stores. It's on Main Street in Templeton, and it's from her farm in Templeton, and it's delicious. So that's a really good alternative for you. But once these greens are cooked down, you just stir it in the greens, and it will take on the same characteristic. And I served it with roasted beets. So.
Where's your farm located?
That's a really good question for Melanie, who owns that store.
York Mountain Road.
I think it's like north of the 46 towards
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
46 what?
Awesome. Well, if you ask her about it, I'm sure she'll be excited to tell you about it because it's a huge endeavor for her and her family. And they have these gorgeous mushrooms that she sells there that she harvests, I think, in the greenhouse even just behind the store. So, yeah, it's a cool endeavor. Family owned.
If you lost your growing, you've got a what, calcium?
Yeah.
How should you balance that with having spinach and greens and
Yeah. Well, spinach is probably not your first go-to source because that's so concentrated in oxalates, way more than every other grain. But this is a reasonable amount. You would still absorb the calcium, not all of it, but probably more than half of the calcium in this you would still absorb despite the oxalate. And this guy will help you out even more. The acid helps pull out some of the calcium and make it more bioavailable for you. And then lastly, once these are nice and cooked down, you're going to pull the beets from the oven and you're going to serve them warm. You could also save it and serve it over a salad. It'd be a wonderful salad topper. And I chose to garnish it with a vegan feta. The feta cheese from Trader Joe's, the vegan feta cheese from Trader Joe's is surprisingly good, actually. It's hard for me to find a vegan cheese that I think is amazing, but I think the feta gets really close. I see a couple people nodding their heads, so maybe you've had it. And then roasted pistachios adds a nice textural and flavor complement as well. Any questions about roasted beets? Okay, sounds good. Next slide. Okay, so this is my favorite recipe of the day. And this recipe touched my heart because this dish tells an important story. And I think that's one of the most remarkable things about food is that it is a common denominator. And it is our memory, it's our connections to others. It is a way to build a bridge to new faces and to customs, to culture, and can certainly tell an important story about someone's family too. And this is a family recipe that was donated very generously to us by my good friend Zoya Dixon. And Zoya is here representing her amazing baba. Baba is grandmother in Ukrainian. And this is a handwritten family recipe that she created. So it's very special. And when I first discussed my quest to find a good wheat recipe with Zoya, Zoya offered this recipe, and when she sent it to me, like, there was a good component of it that was written in Ukrainian. So it does not get more authentic than that. But it's so beautiful, it's so colorful, it's nutritious, it's heartwarming. I'm sure it will surely warm the hearts of everyone around the table. Hopefully including you, as it did for us. And I wanted to invite her up here to speak briefly about Ukraine and this recipe.
Thank you, guys. I wrote a couple notes down because I just wanted to share. Good day. Меня зовут Zoya. My name is Zoya. I'm really honored that Marisa is sharing this recipe with you all. It's really special, and it's been passed down to my family through the generations. All the way from Ukraine via Chicago and landing right here in Templeton, which is pretty awesome. I grew up with my grandmother in Ukrainian village in Chicago, and before I moved home for good in my 20s, I sat down with her for a couple afternoons and we made all of our favorite recipes together, and I wrote them down. So this is one of those recipes. My grandmother is Miroslava, and she immigrated to the U.S. in 1948. She spent about 10 years living in Germany in displaced persons camps, and that's where my aunt was born. She settled in Ukrainian village in Chicago, and that's where she raised 2 kids and me for 60 years. She did pass away 2 years ago. She's almost 100 years old. And we credit her Borsch, and also, so as I just learned on the glycemic index slide, she did used to have cereal with milk as a bedtime snack. So I'm going to alter what I wrote. I'm going to say the Borsch counteracted the cereal with milk and gave her a long, healthy life. So because of what's happening in Ukraine right now, I think this recipe is especially meaningful to share. I would just encourage you to continue to stay informed and engaged, even though it's probably considered old news at this point. What's happening over there is really important for everybody. So please continue to stay engaged, donate to funds supporting Ukraine if and when you can, and make some Borsch.
So the first time we made this, Zoya made it for me. I sat in her kitchen so I could write everything down in English and in a Word document. And it was such a wonderful afternoon. It was like the best thing I'd ever tasted in my life. Like, I could have had the whole pot. It's burning, turns purple, but yeah, it's just a really lovely, heartwarming recipe. Next slide. So you need a couple parsnips. I love parsnips. It's like a starchy carrot. I feel like we don't give parsnips enough attention. 5 to 6 beets. Make sure that you count how many you have, because this will be relevant to you later on in your cooking experience. Half a head of cabbage, roughly chopped. I actually diced everything today so that like not one person would get like a big old piece of cabbage or onion or garlic for that matter. But I think the rough chop is like really wholesome and hearty in this Ukrainian soup. Yellow onion, some garlic, enough olive oil. I did use olive oil. It's not a high cooking temperature at all for the bottom of your soup pot. Half a lemon. If you don't have a half a lemon on hand, you can substitute that out with a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Some tomato paste and 6 to 8 cups of vegetable broth. And of course, to serve it, a little bit of sour cream. And a true Ukrainian will always have this with bread. And it sounds like there's a lot of ways to make Borsch, and this is of course the most special way. But I know there are some modifications that you could experiment with. So you're going to warm up your soup. There she is. Your soup pot, and add the olive oil to the bottom. Gently saute those onions and that garlic until the onions start to turn translucent, probably 3 to 5 minutes or so. And then you're going to add in your beets and your parsnips and your broth. Something that I've learned somewhat more recently is how broth can add so much character or detract from it. And so using a good broth, I think, is really helpful, and you can make it yourself. That would be the very best way to do it. I'm always on a timetable, so I recently discovered Better Than Bouillon, and Zoya introduced me to actually the vegetarian chicken base, so it's a vegetarian form of chicken, and I, not like chickenless chicken, not like a meat analog, but it has that flavor, and you need about a teaspoon for every cup of boiling water that you use, but it is such a nice flavor, and that's all the salt that you need. You don't need any more salt than that. So you're gonna have all the broth. Cover it to let the steam leave the pot and cook it until those beets are nice and pork tender. Then you're going to turn off the heat and fish out the beets. And that's why it's really helpful to know how many beets you added in the first place, because you have a big purple pot of soup and you are hunting for the beets. And so once those beets cool down, enough to be managed by your hands, you're gonna shred them. And shredded beets, I learned, is a really common characteristic of Borsch, right?
Yes, yeah.
So, next slide. You're gonna shred those beets, add them back to the soup, along with the cabbage and the tomato paste and the lemon, and then let it simmer until that cabbage is softened, probably another 10 minutes or so, and serve it warm. It's even better the next day, I think. It got better and better with a little dollop of sour cream. I used the vegan sour cream from Trader Joe's today, but I'm sure there's other varieties elsewhere. Okay, any questions about the board? Sorry you got all your samples at one time. Thank you, Zoya, for putting the recipe on. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the effects of the keto diet. You kind of like alluded to it in general, but do you have more specifics to say about?
Yeah.
Because it's pretty popular.
Yeah, it is. The ketogenic diet is really popular, and in thinking about like a good analogy for the ketogenic diet, I think of the space behind my house. We have a couple acres in the back, and it is naturally very beautiful. We planted some olive trees and some grapes to kind of fill in the space, but we have a lot of weeds, and there's only so much posting, driving that you can do to a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old kid to weed and keep that area free of weeds. And it's a big task for us, actually. So finally I broke down and I asked our landscaper, like, hey, what do you think about all the weeds back here? And like, can we clear out some of the space? And he's like, oh, no problem, I'll just spray it down with Roundup. And we could do that because it would be very efficient and very effective, and all the weeds would disappear like that. You wouldn't even know they were there, right? But we know that Roundup is concentrated in glyphosate, and glyphosate finally is categorized as a group 1 carcinogen. It's a very powerful carcinogen, and there is a cost, right? There's a cost to using Roundup. And it's a health cost, not only to our health, but the health of the soil. And especially in close proximity to those beautiful olives and the grapes that we have, we decided not to do that and offer a more natural landscape instead. And I would say that the ketogenic diet is the Roundup of our nutrition industry. It is, at face value, very effective. It's a thrill, actually, because for the first 2 to 4 weeks after you start a ketogenic diet, and here you are like eating bacon and like protein, and I mean it's tasty, but 2 to 4 weeks after you start it, you lose a huge abundance of weight, and that is thrilling for people that are really wanting to lose weight. You get huge immediate gratification from that. But that weight is not fat mass, unfortunately. It's just a little deceiving. In fact, when you break down your glycogen stores, I've mentioned that's how we store our sugar in our muscle and our liver. When you break down your glycogen, you shed tons of water to excrete it. So that is water for 2 to 4 weeks. And you could lose 20 pounds worth of water. But there's a point, your body likes homeostasis, right? There's a point where your body says, okay, no more water, you're dehydrated enough. Now we're gonna switch over to fat mass. And that's when the weight loss slows. And I see patients that come to my practice and they are defeated. They are disappointed at themselves. Oh, I lost all this weight and I can't lose any more weight now and all this diet. It's not them. That's just all the water weight that went away. And now your body had to get efficient really quickly, and your body, or efficient, resourceful machine that it is, slowed down its metabolism. And that's one of the costs. The other cost is the kind of nutrition that you're taking in on a ketogenic diet. Because I just like from a sensibility standpoint, really high fat, high protein diet is not good for our health. There's a health cost there too, right? And most of the time ketogenic diets are lacking in really good wholesome nutrition. So that's probably the first cost, but from like a long-term weight standpoint, now you're in metabolic slow-mo, And how ketosis or the ketogenic diet works is shifting into a metabolic state called ketosis. And ketosis happens when your glycogen stores are depleted. Remember, your body still wants to have normal blood sugar, and so it recruits protein to do that. It can convert protein into sugar. It does that with your muscle protein, principally, as well as the protein that you eat in your diet. So it changes the muscle protein into sugar to keep your blood sugar level. Now, your brain and your heart need more energy than that, because I told you earlier, your brain is very greedy. It probably consumes 60% of the calories that you eat. And your brain and your heart are the only two organs that can use ketone bodies for energy. And that ketone body, from the state of ketosis, comes from mobilizing fat. So that's where your fat mass gets utilized, and mobilizing your fat that you store to make ketone bodies to fuel your heart and your brain. Again, that's a very energy expensive process, so it throws you into a state of slowed weight loss. Your metabolism slows down, your insulin resistance increases, and it also makes transitioning off that diet very, very difficult for people. There's been 1,000 studies on ketogenic diet, so we have a pretty good understanding of the long-term ramifications, the good and the bad, for weight loss. But most of the time, these diets are compared to low-fat diets, and the amount of fat mass that was lost on low-fat diets significantly overrides the amount of fat mass that was lost on a high-fat, low-carb diet. So I'm kind of curious, right? Low-fat diet yields greater loss of fat mass. Low-fat diet, low-carb diet, much lower loss of fat mass. That was probably way more information.
No, that's great.
That's the lowdown.
That's perfect.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today and carving out time in your busy weekend to talk about nutrition and my favorite subject and try our beet recipes. We're very grateful that you're here. And we're still trying to figure out what we're going to feature next month. But we'll be back a month from now and hope to see all of you again. And yes, that.
I'm just gonna add on the YouTube channel there, we started recording it with the last class, and then also the presentation slides, some of you asked about them. There's a link there in the description on the YouTube, so you can get the slides that she's sharing.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Templeton Hills, yeah, and just look for the Wholesome Kitchen.
Yeah, so the last one's recorded, like we could get that, but then will you circle back to the topics again? Like,
Yeah, I usually do a recap of whatever we covered in the previous presentation. And then I feel like I allude to it quite a bit, like we kind of touched on fats. I touched on polyphenols today, we covered that in December. And so I'll try to like regurgitate it a little bit so we can kind of build on some of those nutritional principles. So you're always welcome to ask, because I know that not everyone can go to every class.